Okay, this is continuing with the book, The Medical Reformation, Vegan Renaissance Bible by me. We're on chapter 1. So this is chapter 1, part 2. Continuing with the theses. Okay, thesis number 17. How come ophthalmologists do not recommend low-fat, low-sodium vegan diet for their diabetic and hypertensive patients, even though Dr. Kempner and his partners in his group showed that you can often reverse retinopathies, and it greatly benefits the patients in other ways. So the ophthalmologists, I'm not aware of them knowing this. Okay, I've never heard of them being aware of this. Number 18, how come, and by the way, ophthalmologists are considered some of the smartest doctors in the hospital because you have to have really high board scores to get into ophthalmology. Same thing in dermatology, because lots of people want to go into ophthalmology, dermatology, all right? So they usually tend to be very good students, and they don't know any of this stuff, as far as I'm aware of. Okay, number 18, how come one almost never hears a dermatologist talking about the estrogenic toxins in sunscreen, deodorant, and other personal hair care products? You know, everybody else says, oh, you need sunscreen, you need sunscreen. Do you need sunscreen? I don't think that's true. I would never wear sunscreen unless I had to be out in the middle of the sun all day long and I couldn't escape that. I just go indoors when I've had enough sun. There's a lot of toxic things in sunscreen. I've given separate video lectures on that, but it's much worse than people think. Okay, number 19. How come neurologists do not put multiple sclerosis patients on the rice-swank diet, which is a low-fat diet, especially low in saturated fat, when it's been shown to have the best results of anything ever published for long-term care of MS? He's got 34-year follow-up. He even had 50-year follow-up. Rice Swank on multiple sclerosis. He was originally from Canada, and then he later went to Oregon. He later also did some work with Dr. McDougall. Another thing about neurologists. By the way, I like neurologists. I got a lot of friends that are neurologists. But I'm still making out the point that their textbooks are a joke. I own big 1,700-page textbooks on neurology, and I go through them, and I'm like, they're so stupid. It's not even funny. We're going to talk about some of the ways they're so stupid. They're totally stupid on MS and autoimmune disease. You won't find anything, about aspartame, aluminum, fluoride, glutamate, excitotoxicity. You'll find like one paragraph on excitotoxicity related to stroke, another paragraph on excitotoxicity related to epilepsy, seizure disorders. That's nothing. It should be like a couple hundred pages, at least 100 pages at a minimum, going through all this stuff. And then also, that's why people sometimes ask me, how am I so confident, okay? Well, the reason I'm confident is that I know all these books are a joke, It's kind of, they're just stupid. and then the thing is like, well, how come their doctors don't know how stupid their books are? Because all they read are their own books, and they're tested on these books, so they have no incentive to read anything else, and so they just don't know. But the patients suffer from this. How come neurologists do not know that the brain injury from stroke or trauma also causes increased blood-brain barrier permeability, and that eating more plant fiber helps to protect both the gut barrier and the blood-brain barrier? They ought to know that. So a high-fiber diet should be part of stroke treatment, okay? Another thing about neurologists, how come stroke neurologists are not taught the basic introductory level stuff about diet and blood flow, hypertension, diabetes, dilatory theory? I told a lot of neurologists about dilatory theory and about my theory of neurodegeneration, the neurovascular uncoupling theory of Peter Rogers, MD. They don't know it. And they're like, wow, that's good, that's great, They wish they had known it because it makes obvious sense. Anybody who deals with these areas and looks at brain MRIs, what I'm saying is obvious, okay? The other things, we've talked about this before too. Neurologists are taught, all medical students, all residents are taught, Alzheimer's is the most common cause of dementia, and I think it's a big joke. It's like the abominable snowman or something. You can't diagnose Alzheimer's by physical exam. You can't diagnose it by historical question. There's no question you can ask a patient. You can't put a stethoscope anywhere on their body and know they've got Alzheimer's, okay? And then you say, well, what about a brain MRI or CAT scan? Now, you'll have, rarely do I see a character, I see many thousands of brains. Rarely do I see a characteristic pattern of parietal and medial temporal lobe atrophy, okay? And then even the nuke med tests are not that specific. And then you say, well, of course we can diagnose it at autopsy. No, even at autopsy, the so-called Alzheimer type patient often doesn't have it. And then the so-called non-Alzheimer patient often does have these senile plaques and neurofibrillary tangles and stuff. It's just not that accurate. Yeah, it can point you in a direction, fine. But it's not reliably accurate enough, to count on it. And because of that, It's a big joke, and then the treatments stink. So you got a disease that you can't accurately diagnose and you can't treat. Sounds stupid, doesn't it? Yes, it is. And then you've got obvious theories that explain dementia. Jack Delatorre's theory of mouse equivalence, also called the vascular hypothesis of dementia, and my theory, the Peter Rogers, MD theory of neurovascular uncoupling, and which is really an expansion of the calcium hypothesis and excitotoxicity hypotheses. I sort of put the whole thing together by knowing nutrition and toxicology, as well as all the sort of PhD basic mechanism information and the Martin Pall theories of VGCCs opened up by EMF. Okay, and basically what's great about Delatorre's theory and my theory is once you understand them, it's very easy to know what you do. Just to avoid things that cause mouse equivalence, and just avoid things. I'm going to go into much more detail on this in the dementia chapters, but they're obvious. Just avoid excitotoxins, mitochondria inhibitors. It's easy. It makes it obvious how you prevent dementia. Does that give you a 100% guarantee? No, but it gives you pretty good odds, and it's pretty obvious that it's worth doing. Okay, oops. Gonna line this up. Thesis number 21. How come orthopedic doctors know so little about low-fat, low-sodium vegan diet, even though it's one of the most effective ways to treat arthritis and to improve the healing of fractures? How come musculoskeletal doctors don't know about plant-based diets that are more alkaline and help prevent osteoporosis? How come musculoskeletal doctors don't know that calcium supplements for prevention of osteoporosis are a joke? Actually, a lot of them are starting to know that. That's not completely outside their knowledge spectrum. And they cause all-cause mortality, the calcium supplements, when given in high amounts, let's say over 1,400 milligrams a day. All right, and I was considering going to orthopedics. When I was a senior medical student, I was a real good student. I could go into anything I wanted. And I was considering orthopedic surgery because I really liked orthopods. A lot of them are former athletes and they're fun to hang around with. Okay, and then I considered cardiology, but I really didn't like it when I went and visited some cardiologists. I thought it was boring, and then I ended up going into radiology with the idea of becoming an imaging-guided surgeon, interventional radiologist, and so that's how I ended up where I were. Plus, I knew I kind of have an encyclopedic memory for medical stuff, so I knew that would serve me well in radiology. Okay, so that's how I ended up there. I did a open surgical internship first. All right, but what I'm saying is when I rotated through all my orthopedic rotations and I did a lot of stuff in ortho, never once did diet ever come up. I was actually completely unaware that diet had anything to do with disease when I was a young doctor. All the way through my fellowship even, it never was an issue. Number 22, how come obstetric doctors do not teach patients more about low-fat plant-based diets and water filtration, even though this has so much potential to help mothers have healthy babies and to prevent epigenetic obesity and other diseases? How come mothers are not taught how bad baby food formula is for them? Often it'll come in an aluminum can, neurotoxic. It'll have BPA, estrogenic, and neurotoxic, and a mitochondrial inhibitor. It'll have soy. If it's non-organic and it's probably processed with hexane, and soy's got a lot of problems in it too. It's disruptive to the endocrine system. High fructose corn syrup often contaminated with mercury. How come infertility experts often do not know about the common estrogenic chemicals in food, water, air pollution, and personal care products? Okay, so I also had a friend, I'm not going to say who this friend is, but this friend had a friend who was an OB-GYN doctor. And we were at a social event together, and this friend likes to kind of challenge me and was giving me a little shit. They go, this is the smartest OB-GYN doctor, top student, did these 2 fellowships and knows so much. I'm like, okay, really great. So I sat down and talked to this super smart OB-GYN doctor, and I just asked basic things, common neurotoxic things for pediatrics, common things, about estrogenic chemicals, and she almost didn't know anything. It was a joke, okay? And I'm pretty used to that being the case because there's very few doctors that have read outside of the conventional literature. And if you only stay in your own literature, you never get these other ideas. They don't allow them in the journals, and nowadays it's even worse than it used to be. The journals are largely owned by the big pharma companies in terms of the medical journals, and then the big food owns a lot of the nutrition journals. So it's hard for useful information to even get into the journals. You usually see all these bogus studies with tons and tons of statistics, and they're a big joke. Okay, how come infertility experts often do not know about the common estrogenic chemicals in food, water, air pollution, and personal care products? Okay, I know some infertility experts who do that every day, and they're focused on in vitro fertilization. They get a lot of money for that, fertility drugs. They really don't know, in my experience of them, that much about estrogenic chemistry and toxicology. Okay, number 23. And so what's the point of all this? I'm going through all these theses. The point is, if you have a condition or you're worried about something, should read on your own, and you can learn much more than you realize. You'll find tons of stuff in this book, and it'll point quite often in the direction that'll help you to get more information if you want it. How come opioids were pushed by so many doctors and drug companies, and this led to many thousands of accidental opioid overdose deaths? That's super common. Why is that even permitted? The drug companies try to tell everybody, oh, opioids are safe, opioids are safe. So lots of these doctors are prescribing opioids pretty commonly to patients for pain, when these opioids are very dangerous. They should not be routinely prescribed. And they're being allowed to come into the country for whatever the reason. So, of course, I can tell you, when you look closely at stuff, it almost always comes down to money. There's a lot of money in it, okay? So things that generate money, they get a big push. Okay, simple things like the truth and all that kind of stuff. It's nice, and that's what you want, but it's usually not going to be promoted hardly at all. Okay, I even had people trying to block me, from teaching you guys. They think I shouldn't be teaching you guys, but I'll do it while I can. I'll teach you guys. Like I said, I get almost hardly any views. Like this video right here, it'll probably get 300 views or something at the most. All right, versus somebody's gonna get on here and they're gonna say, all this crap. Soy is good for you. Opioids are safe. Caffeine is good for you. High-fat diets are good for you. Okay, meat in moderation and fish. All this nonsense. It is what it is. All right, so, all right, let us continue. Number 24. How come nutrition, epidemiology, and toxicology are not taught in pre-med, med school, residency, or even fellowship? Is someone like big food, big fat, big protein, big pharma, and big population control hiding the truth from the healthcare providers? I wonder, okay? Because people think doctors are so smart. In my experience with doctors, they are hard workers, because you have to be a hard worker to survive in medicine. But most of them, they just do whatever they have to in med school to get by, to pass their tests. And then once they're done, they're usually, about 30 years or older, and they want to have their babies, get married, have a little bit of life like all their friends are jealous of who've so-called had a life for a while. And then they go to try to become partner at a job, and they get stuck with the bad weekend calls. They're up late at night with the baby, so they're exhausted. Let's say it's a guy, and then his wife's pissed off at him because he's working so much. He never takes her anywhere. So he says, okay, we'll go to vacation at one of these warm places for the continuing medical education conference. And they go there on vacation. They sign in on attendance in the morning, and then they just go to the beach all day. They don't learn anything. And even if you go to the lectures are a joke. There's always going to be just the same stuff you heard in residency. I would say, in my experience of listening to continuing medical education lectures, 95% are stuff that I was taught in residency. And I love it when they teach something that's new, but it's a rare event. Okay, 25, number 25, thesis number 25. How come there is no medical specialty of nutrition therapy? Why is nutrition consult in most medical centers handled by dietitians? I don't know exactly what their degree is, like a 2-year degree, like a junior college degree or something. Maybe it's a 4-year degree. I don't know. When most dietitians don't know much about nutrition. Okay. It's been my experience, and I've talked to some dietitians, that the vast majority of them really don't know much about nutrition. There are some exceptions. I've met some that are really knowledgeable and good and make efforts to stay up to date and learn. But in my experience, and when you go to all the continuing medical education courses and you hear them give lectures, they say one stupid thing after another, promote the Mediterranean diet. Okay, and then I actually knew a dietitian lady pretty well many years ago, and I would talk with her, and she told me, all these big food companies were sponsoring her dietitian school, and so they would tell them, oh, high fructose corn syrup's okay, and all this other stuff. Okay, and then here is the AMA, the American Medical Association, and it seems to me as if they ought to rename themselves the AMMA, American MERDER, for Money Association, because it all runs on money. And so that's what I'm saying is once you've gone to atheistic Darwinism and degraded the patient as being nothing but a talking monkey, you no longer have an obligation to them, and then you can just rip them off, and that's quite often what happens. I mean, don't get me wrong, some things really help the patient. I think the emergency room provides very valuable service because its acute things can be treated much better than chronic things and stabilized. And end stage stuff tends to be pretty well handled by the medical system. They're good at putting a kidney failure patient on dialysis. They're good at performing, kidney transplants, for example. Okay, some of these sorts of things, but they're not good at treating the common diseases, which are what vast majority of patients have. And so what I'm saying is conventional medicine for a lot of stuff is basically a joke. I mean, people say, is alternative medicine legitimate? The real question is conventional medicine legitimate, okay? The way it's practiced in the modern world, I think more people suffer from it than benefit from it. And I'm real sorry to say that because, I devoted my life to this. And, when I was young, I sort of had this idea that, my life sucks. I'm at Stanford. I'm all lonely. And, I'm just studying all day and then wrestling. And that was pretty much my life. And I had this idea in my mind, well, someday I'll become a great doctor and life will be fun again. I'll have all this social circle and it'll be a lot of fun like it was in high school or something. And then it's kind of like, and I remember also being an athlete, and everybody likes a good athlete, but in medicine, man, the smarter you get, the more people hate you. The more enemies come out of the woodwork to try to, hinder what you're trying to do. And that's been my experience too. Like I said, lots of people know me, know how smart I am. They never invite me ever to speak in front of a medical group. I was before they knew me well. Now that they know me, never. And I don't expect to ever get invited to speak in front of a medical group the rest of my life, which is kind of funny because a lot of them tell me I'm the smartest, best doctor they ever met in their life, but they would never invite me for these reasons. Because there's no money in the stuff I'm saying. Empowering the patients. Patients are a bunch of poor people. They have no money. Why bother helping the patients? They're a bunch of lowlifes in a sense. They can't do anything for you. They can't give you any money. They can't do anything. Drug companies can give you a lot of money. The insurance companies can give you a lot of money. Okay, continuing on. It will always be a lot more profitable to pump people full of drugs and to rip them off with unnecessary imaging tests and surgeries than to empower them with education. Okay, we kind of talked about this, how coronary artery stenting, $30,000, open heart surgery, $120,000 or so. And then the other thing too is, ignorant people say, oh, you just need objective science and atheism is okay. But that's all completely untrue. The best science comes from Christianity. The modern scientific method of theory, experiment, hypothesis, reassessment of data, and possible formulation of new hypotheses, that all came out of the Christianity, out of the Catholic Church in particular. Okay, that's well known. There's nothing. If you study history, you'll see that is the case, and you'll also see that the Aristotelian. If I look at Christianity, I see two main branches. There's sort of the Plato of the ancient Greeks, inspiring St. Augustine, inspiring Luther, and the whole Protestant thing, okay? And then I sort of see largely Aristotle and Aristotelian perspectives coming through St. Thomas Aquinas, and that leading to more of the Catholic point of view. The Catholic point of view is a lot more fun. It's a lot more open-minded about things. Okay, so when you have an atheistic system, it gets the scientists to just go for the money. We already talked about this, how if you're at a university and you want to get promoted and research and stuff, you have to make Big Pharma and the insurance company happy. Okay, Christianity helps a person think that they're not just materialistic, okay? What I mean by that is a materialistic point of view, in my opinion, means sort of that you say, well, look, if I just do what I'm supposed to and, generate a lot of billing codes, I'll get money, then I'll have money for myself and my family. And if there is no God and the patients are just a bunch of talking monkeys, then that's a very reasonable point of view. And I would say that's the point of view of most doctors. And most doctors, though, I think it's because they don't know any better, okay? I got a lot of internal medicine friends. They're sad that their patients aren't doing well. They would like their patients to do better, but they don't know what to do. And it's also the case, even when you tell the patient what to do, most of them won't do it anyways. All right. But what I'm saying is, what I like about a Christian mentality, it says that your family isn't just your direct blood relatives. It's also sort of all of mankind. Okay, and I think that's a good thing. Okay, so here's the gospel according to Matthew. This I command you, to love your neighbor. Verily I say unto you, that which ye do to the least of my brethren, ye have done unto me. Okay, so what that means is some poor, pathetic patient, like most of them are, they're barely literate, they're, functional illiterates, they're not that articulate, they're kind of sad and pathetic. So, here you are as a doctor. You got to see 20 more patients that day. Any minute you go beyond your 5 or 10 minutes allotted to this patient is going to come out of your time. You're going to go home late. You're going to be making somebody else wait. Somebody's going to be annoyed at you. Your coworkers are going to be pissed off that you're wasting too much time with each patient. But what I'm saying is you have to say, right at this moment while I'm with this person, this is the most important thing in the world right now, and I'm going to do everything I can to help them. Even if I think they probably won't follow it, I'm going to give them the real deal. I'll at least point them in the right direction. And you have to have that. Otherwise, you're always going to end up with match the pill to the ill and send the bill and, get these talking monkeys out of my office. Okay, you can't get around that. I'm not aware of it. Okay, I've been a doctor over 30 years, and I'm not aware of any way to get around that. Okay, and I've talked to lots of other doctors. They all say the same thing. It's just how it is. Okay, maybe I got to shrink this down a little bit here. Let me just shrink this a little bit so I can get the picture words in there. Okay, so here is a painting called The Apotheosis of St. Thomas Aquinas by this painter Francisco de Zurbarán from 1631. So Aquinas developed a school of scholasticism, or also called Thomism, that showed that faith and reason go together, that religion and science go together. And I would definitely agree with that. I would say that's essential, that attitude, okay? And I also had the experience that my dad was Mr. Academics and my mom was like Mrs. Religious. But my mom had so much better judgment about people that I learned to go to my mother for advice rather than my dad, even though he meant well. Okay, I maybe get his opinion first to know what I'm not going to do. Then I go talk to my mother and figure out what I should do. Okay, and look how beautiful all this art is. Catholicism promotes this idea of creating beautiful things and doing good, beautiful things. That's one of the things I like the most about it. Okay, Aquinas organized the knowledge of the ancients like Aristotle and Plato and helped standardize the curriculum for the universities of his day, which set the foundation for the Renaissance in Europe, which was centered in Italy with Florence and Rome. But of course, there was a Renaissance-like movement going on in other countries, like in the northern countries as well. Of course, there were some great artists and whatnot in the Netherlands, the Dutch, and of course, Germany, all that stuff. There were a lot of real talented artists. So, here we are. This is chapter 1, figure 2. This is Dante. Dante said, in middle age I found myself in a dark wood, and the path was lost. From the Divine Comedy. Painting is by Gustave Doré in 1885. So what's the point? This is what happens to so many people. You're going along in your teens and your 20s. Everything is great, okay? You're having fun. You're seeing your friends or something. And then you get married, have a baby, and it's like, holy crap, you got to move to the suburbs. You got to commute long distance to your job. You got to make some money. And you're tired. You're working long hours. You're kind of exhausted. You stop exercising. Plus, you're married, so you're not competing, to find a woman anymore. And you get fat and sick. And all of a sudden, the Johnson's not working so well. The doctor says you're diabetic. You get on the scale. You've gained 40 pounds since college. You got a big belly. You're physically weak. And now you're hypertensive diabetic with a fatty liver. And you're told you're at risk for heart attack, impotence, and stroke. And it's like, what the hell happened? And you go to the doctor and he says, this is common. This is routine for your age. Just take these pills. And you're like, whoa, is that what I got to do the rest of my life? Okay, so that's a common situation. And all these things just keep multiplying into other problems. And the pills have side effects, etc. Women, the health decline tends to pick up a lot more after menopause. Okay, their menstruation every month actually protects them. Okay, and then here's this picture that I think sums it up pretty well. Let me shrink my little thing here. This is Dante at the gates of hell with Virgil, his hero from the ancient Rome who wrote the Aeneid. And on top of the gates of hell it says, abandon hope, all ye who enter, And what that means is conventional medicine says, look, these are chronic diseases. We cannot cure them. We never cure these diseases, 100%. We never cure them. Abandon hope of being cured. You simply take these pills until you get worse, and then we do start doing surgeries on you. And that's what the expectation is. Okay? So you have to think outside the box before you are ever going to have a hope of getting better. And you simply just ask yourself for any disease, who doesn't get this disease? What are they doing? Who gets cured of this disease? What do they do? And just look around the world. There's a lot of people in this world, and you'll often find there's a population that doesn't get this disease. And you say, why do they not get this disease? And you'll be amazed at how often that tells you how to prevent the disease, often to cure it, or at least to minimize it. You will be amazed at how common that is to find that. So that was the painting, Gates of Hell, seen by Dante and Virgil, by William Blake of 1810. Okay. He's the English guy. He's the guy who wrote, Tiger, Tiger, Burning Bright, In the Forest of the Night. Okay, here's a nice painting by Jan Stejka, the Polish artist. It's from 1872, and this is Copernicus. And Copernicus figured out that the sun was at the center of the universe. Not the earth, but the sun. He was a Catholic priest. Well, he's a Catholic, deacon-like priest. Okay, but that was a dramatic, big thing. He didn't have the data to prove it yet, but all the data he had showed that that was the case, all right? Later on, Kepler showed you don't need the epicycles and whatnot, etc. All right, well, anyways, so here, what am I saying here? Why am I showing this in relation to medicine? Because medicine is undergoing a similar thing whereby they're realizing that health does not just revolve around taking drugs, okay? So here's the earth, all right? And that there's all these other things, the sun, social life, love, stress reduction, sleep, laughter, vegan diet, filtered water. All these things are major components. You could even call them, a lot of people call them the pillars of health. It's best to get your vitamin D from the sunshine. Maintaining social relationships lowers your stress level, maintains your social support. Having a loving relationship also makes you real happy. Getting your sleep is important because you heal better during sleep. Your brain cleans itself during sleep. Laughter, of course, lowers stress, makes us happy. Vegan diet gives us good blood flow, amongst other things, more antioxidants. Filtered water, you avoid all the toxins in unfiltered water. Exercise does tons of great things, pumps your lymphatics better. Organic avoids a bunch of toxins. Religious people are healthier. Music is very calming. It lowers one's stress level quite a bit. And when I say music, I mean music with a melody, with words that you can understand. I'm not a big fan of beat music. As a matter of fact, whenever I hear a car drive by me and I'm hearing beat music, I think that person's probably stupid. Because when you listen to beat music, you can't think, okay? I'm always thinking about something, thinking about diabetes, dementia, whatever, okay? And I got friends who lift weights, and sometimes, they always want to listen to beat music, and it annoys me. I'm like, don't play that. We can't talk. I can't think. It sort of like beats it just makes you stupid. You can't think when there's something going bump, bump, bump. So, anyways, Schopenhauer had said the same thing. He says, you can estimate a person's IQ by their tolerance of noise. The less they like noise, the smarter they are. And Goethe had said similar things as well. Okay, so the center of health is God's way with all this stuff here. And it is not conventional health way, man's way. Eating the crappy food, taking the drugs, surgery, all this other stuff. Like I said too, and like veg source abbreviation. Fiber is life, pharma is death, okay? So once you realize this, you come out of the paradigm that I need to go and always take a drug, you'll be a lot better off. Because I remember, too, when I was a kid, I saw some cartoon, and it was making fun of a person who had a bone in their nose, and they go to the witch doctor, and the witch doctor gives them a magic potion. And the gist of the cartoon is, look how stupid that person is getting a magic potion from a witch doctor. And I said to myself, how is that any different than American conventional medicine? The patient goes to a doctor who gives them a magic potion, and then they hope that gets them better. Yeah, like you trust the pharma company, and and now where's the drug made? Nowadays, that drug's not even made in the United States with quality control. It'll be made in some far-off, third-world place. Who knows what the quality control is? Yeah, right. Okay? And then they got so much money Do you think they're not going to pay off regulatory agencies to do quality control? Who knows? Who knows? Okay, at the basic level, MDs don't know what common diseases, what causes them, or how to treat them. You know, MD nowadays sort of means medications are drugs, okay? They're not taught how to think in other ways. And if you really want to be good at medicine, you got to learn how to think in other ways. You have to do all this studying on your own. But it's actually pretty easy to do. You just have to be aware of it, and you have to be motivated to do it. And I also laugh that, you know, like I said, when I get a medical student, I always jokingly tell them, look, I can teach you more in 2 hours about disease causation and treatment than you learned in the last 8 years. And they all laugh, but by the time 2 hours goes by, they routinely start smiling. They go, that was great. That was awesome. Wow. They go, we want a refund from our medical school. They said it was amazing, okay? And I had this one black doctor, and he said to me, he goes, I want to thank you so much. He says, I wanted to be a doctor. I've worked very hard, and I really want to help people. He says, and I study. I do everything I'm supposed to. He says, but I come out of there feeling I don't know how to do anything. He says, I don't know how to help people get better. He says, but after I talk to you just 2 hours, he says, now I feel ready to stand before a community and really help a lot of people. So he actually came back and visited me to thank me for that. Because I went through, you know, the pathophysiology of hypertension and stuff, and it was nice. Okay, internal medicine is the core education of all doctors. So basically what you learn in medical school is how to be an internal medicine doctor, okay? You don't learn surgery, diagnostic radiology, all these other things unless you do residencies in those fields and specialty training, okay? But you can practice as like an internist like doctor with just 1 year residency even. Okay, and so here's my point. Any health coach without a college degree can easily learn more about the causes, prevention, and treatment of disease in 1 week than an average MD learns in 12 years, including pre-med, med school, and residency, and a fellowship. And that's true. Okay, and so like I said too, if anybody reads this book, they'll know so much more about medicine and cause and treatment of disease than any MD who's completed a residency, okay? You'll have fun with this. If you have a doctor in the family and you're not a doctor, read this book and start asking them questions. And at first they're going to go, where'd you learn that? How do you know that's true? And then they're going to look it up and they're going to go, holy shit, you're right. You'll have fun with them. Okay, okay, let's continue on here. Beginning in high school, science students are taught there's no God, that evolution explains the origin of life. Completely untrue. I said, see James Tour. He's the most entertaining, smart guy about origin of life. Okay, we kind of talked about some of the stuff that humans are just talking monkey is what secular atheistic Darwinism teaches in the colleges and the med schools and all the grad schools. And if somebody talks about intelligent design or Christianity, the professor did that, they'd be fired. Okay, so it's really intolerant, dogmatic religiosity. It's the religion of communism. That's what it is, okay? And you should know that because many of you are about to be enslaved or to otherwise lose out big time because of this cow, moon, east-ism. And so understanding it, what is being done to you, helps you to avoid it and having a chance to survive and thrive. Okay, and conventional medicine is sort of controlled in many ways by the same sort of big money, you know, billionaires who think the world is has too many people. Okay? So that's not really who you want to depend on to keep you alive longer. Okay? You know, all this nonsense about, you know, there's a problem with the ozone because of our farts. Give me a break. That you shouldn't be able to cook, you know, on the same type of stove you've used, you know, since you were a kid. There's tons of energy material available for that, the gas, so to speak. You know, we don't need to eat bugs. I just tell you this because if you buy into all the nonsense being promoted, you'll fall for this craziness, okay? And I've been around a long time, okay? The weather has not changed that much because I pay pretty close attention to it. My life is about as boring as a life gets, and I can tell you, I know the weather, okay? I have to drive in the weather. I've done it for many, many decades, and it hasn't changed, okay? And I hear all kinds of things about the electric cars, that they can shut your car off externally if you haven't paid a ticket or if they're just pissed off at you. They can monitor your speed and potentially give you a ticket. They can check if you frequently have rapid braking as an indicator that you tend to drive too fast, and they could raise your car insurance. I've heard that that's being done in some places. Old stuff is better. Because, I remember in high school when they still had automotive class, and I had friends and relatives that were good with cars. They could change the oil. They could do a whole bunch of stuff. They'd be sitting there in their front lawn with the hood of the car opened up and fixing stuff. That's their car, and they can fix it. They're not dependent on somebody. You make a car more electronic, then there is only one place you can go as a dealer, and you only got one place to go. The dealer is going to rip you off. Okay, and then I've noticed sort of like the environmental movement, by the way, I have some experience with it because I had initially considered being a wildlife biologist. And then what happened was I noticed that, I like the farmers. I know a lot of farmers. Okay, I don't know a lot of farmers, but I know some farmers. I know people from farming families, and I like them. They're good people. They're hardworking people. They make food for us, all right? And then what I saw when I was taking these advanced environmental biology classes, I took classes like field trips on bird watching to study bird populations in national parks and stuff. I was interested in some pretty advanced stuff, and I know some people that are pretty famous in the environmental movements. And what I saw as a pattern was they hate people. Their attitude is nature's fine. We just need to minimize people, and they would want to take land away from people, keep land so it's not accessible to people, take land away from farmers. Come up with the snail darter and all this other BS to try to take land away from farmers. And I realize they're not what you would want. Okay, let's put it that way. And I kind of lost my enthusiasm for that. Let's see what else. Their motto, I said, was like save the trees and get rid of the kids. Okay, they want to herd the people into these little places. Okay, 15, what, that are not going to be a nice place to live. All right, you don't want to be there. All right, why can't we, kind of live happily and peacefully like we always have? Why do we need to be sent to those places? And those same experts that sort of destroy every city they take control of are the ones that saying you should trust them to make the environment good. I find that hard to believe. Okay, here is a painting called The Age of Augustus. Augustus was the emperor of Rome. He is also called Octavian. He is the one who was victorious against Mark Antony and against Pompey. Okay, and this painting shows, the emperor up here who is considered a god amongst the Romans, and also The Birth of Christ by Jean-Léon Gérôme, 1854. And this painting in some ways symbolizes current America. We're either going to embrace biblical ethics or we're going to be controlled by, rich people who think they're gods and do all kinds of things. And I'll tell you, if you want to read a great book, and it's actually more fun to listen to the audiobook. It's a lot of work to read it. You got to have a lot of time, but it's psychologically magnificent. It's Quo Vadis by Henry Sienkiewicz, okay, Polish guy. And I can tell you, Ayn Rand said that is the greatest novel ever written. And I like what Arthur Schopenhauer said. He said, the sign of a good novel is interiority, meaning that there's a lot of psychological discussion going on that an intelligent person finds quite interesting. Versus when you make a movie or a book for dummies, then there's always just a lot of action, action and special effects, with very little conversational rhetoric. That's like movies for retards. That's why I don't go to, any Hollywood movie anymore, because that's how they all are. They're just, a bunch of special effects, action, and stupid. Okay, so here then is a painting called The Doubting Thomas by Caravaggio. He was the great artist of the 1600s, sort of like the time when Baroque was really getting big. And a magnificent painting. And the reason I show you that painting, I say that I realize that you probably think I'm joking. And I would ask you a question. If somebody gave you $20, would you poison a child? Okay? And the average person would say, no way. Even if the extenuating circumstances made them want to do it more than otherwise. Super annoying brat. They don't like the ethnic group or religion of the parents, or even know and hate the parents. Most people, they say, no, I would never do that. That is wrong. Okay, and it is. Okay, but what I'm trying to say is, the way our healthcare system runs, every day long, they poison children. I mean, giving amphetamines to a kid is poisoning the kid. Okay? But everyone's perfectly happy with it, and just like I say, it's not my kid. Who cares if they poison these other kids with all these attention deficit medicines? Often turn those kids into psych patients, cause slowly progressive worsening brain damage. And then, to adults, people are less sympathetic to adults than kids. But what I'm saying is this is routinely done all day long, and no one cares. No one pays any attention. That's where our society is at, okay? So, like, you read something about some ancient population from hundreds of years ago, and you say, oh, these people are so stupid. Look what they did. And I would say, look what our society does. I had that said to me by one of my friends. He was a neuroradiologist, and he said, I used to kind of laugh at some of these other fields, chiropractors or some homeopathy or something, that they were doing stupid stuff and just to make money and that it didn't really help the patient. He says, then I realized as I got to know more about my own field that we do the same thing quite often. All right, so, you should be allowed to be objectively honest and try to come up with the best plan, even if it doesn't fit conventionality. But what happens in conventional medicine is you're forced. You must generate billing codes. Every doctor has some bean counter who's keeping track of how many billing codes they generate every day. And if they don't generate a lot of billing codes, they all get the same speech. You're not pulling your weight. Other doctors in your specialty are generating this much money. You need to generate more billing codes. We all practice the standard of care. We don't want to hear anything about quality. We don't give a shit about quality. We care about how many billing codes a day are you generating. Okay? Now, I love this painting right here. This is called The Road to Damascus, Conversion on the Road to Damascus by Caravaggio again. And I think this screen is actually distorting this picture. It's better than this. This is a magnificent painting, one of the greatest paintings of all time. Okay, and Caravaggio, I mean, the amount of detail is just so perfect. And it was kind of funny. This is a picture in the chapel, was in competition with Carracci, had a painting like right here on the wall. So Caravaggio was putting the horse's butt to face Carracci's painting, saying, look, my painting's better than yours, don't give me any shit, because Carracci would make fun of him. That was sort of more of the mannerism style. And Caravaggio's was more of the highly realistic Baroque type style. So anyways, what I'm trying to say is that's like the experience I had when I was in my mid-30s. And I was thinking, conventional medicine is the best. Every other field of medicine is bogus. And then, they can't help myself or my parents. And I start reading this nutritional literature. And I'm like, wow, this is where all the useful information is. They're curing people. People who eat this way don't get these diseases. And that was quite a revelation to me. Okay, a little bit about how the system works, okay? At sort of the bottom of the healthcare system, the lowest paid employees, the volunteers, the clerks, the secretaries, the transporters. In my experience, the greeters, these people love the patients. They love them. They'll go out of their way to help them. And a lot of them are patients themselves. Their family members are patients. And, patients talk to them a lot, more than they talk to the people higher up in the system. And that's a good thing. It makes them happy. And so that's all good. The next level up, I would say, are the thin intelligence, meaning there are people who are well educated in one narrow field, like a silo type of education. It's very narrow to what it does. Narrow expertise. I learned that word from Michael Crichton, thin intelligence, like the experts in Jurassic Park. Okay, and they like the patients. You ask any doctor, and I'll tell you 9 out of 10 say they want to do something useful with their education. They could have done other things. They wanted to help people. That is true. Okay, and the same thing for all the other related healthcare fields. All right, I know tons of people in these things. And what happens, though, is it's kind of like being a school teacher. The individual can only do so much. The system has more effect on what happens to patients than does the individual. So even if a doctor really means well and is trying to do good, the system controls things more than they do. Okay, and then you move the next level up. And you're talking about, and also they're kind of forbidden almost to talk about nutrition, toxicology, because it's not reimbursed, and religion because it's frowned on. Things that could be really useful to patients. Hospital owners, they're usually business people. They often have an MBA. And many of them actually don't know much about health. Some of them do. Some of them are doctors, but usually they're not doctors. But some of them are. Their focus is on money. They have to make money. Because usually there's somebody above them, either from Big Pharma or somebody who owns the hospital or something. And that person wants money. Okay, that's all they care about, probably. So what ends up happening is, instead of emphasizing how are our outcomes, what you'll always hear them tend to talk about is, how's our productivity? How efficient are we? How are we doing in competition with the other hospital, in the neighboring town, across town? We want to outcompete them and make more money than them, all right? And sometimes you'll get somebody who seems to be nice, but a lot of times too you'll have a puppet figure who basically is doing what they're told by somebody higher up who owns the place and wants money. And then when you get even higher up, like to these big pharma companies, and these ones are owned by people who are not even just talking about net wealth in the millions, they're talking in the billions. In my experience, from what I've seen by this idea of promoting poisonous drugs to kids, they hate the patients. Okay, they consider them, like I said, like vermin. All right, like a pest. Because, like I said, who would ethically do that to kids? You have to hate them. Okay, otherwise you wouldn't do that. Okay. It never occurs to these, what I would call, I got them color coded. So blue corresponds to this level, green to this level, and I use black to go to this level and red to go to the highest level there. So that's the thing too that kind of shocked me, is that, like I said, people think doctors are so smart, but most of them never really learn almost anything outside of conventional training, and conventional training ignores all the most important stuff, so they really don't know nutrition, epidemiology, toxicology, and that's the most important stuff for understanding disease. And they also don't learn pathophysiology if it wasn't in their basic book and they weren't tested on it. So they got giant gaps in their nodule, giant gaps in their nodule. They just accept this idea of we always lose, we never cure these patients. That's just how it is. And I jokingly had a video about health conversations recently about this doctor I know who's a real bright guy, but he basically kind of has an attitude. These patients are hopeless. What are you going to do? Be nice to them. But, you're never going to cure or heal any of these people. All right, so then the bean counters. Okay, we covered pretty much that. So what I'm trying to say is, with the current system, the insurance companies are happy, they're getting their money. Big Pharma's happy, they're getting their money. Device manufacturers are happy, they're getting their money. Doctors are getting some money, not what they used to, but at least they're getting some money. But who's getting screwed? The patient gets screwed, okay? And like I said too, you tell a doctor to read the journals, but the journals are bogus too. They're owned by a drug company, and the drug company just puts bogus studies in there saying how great their drugs, often ghost written, okay? Often the negative stuff, not printed, published. So the American public has been sold down the river in a canoe with holes in it, okay? When the canoe sinks, Big Pharma laughs, okay? Who cares what happens to the proles? Big Pharma knows there is an endless supply of chumps who believe in the healthcare system. Big Pharma knows that there's an endless supply of money-hungry, phony Ivy League doctors that will sell out the public, for the smallest amounts of money. They'll lie, they'll trick them. It's really sad. That's what I like about going low-fat vegan, is you want to try to be able to avoid the healthcare system. Ideally, you shouldn't need to use it. All these people in these blue zone, rural places, they're not going to doctors for checkups and screening and stuff. They just take care of themselves. Okay, so here's a painting about the ancient Greeks. This is Diogenes. He was a homeless street philosopher, and he's walking through Athens with a lantern. And he said he's searching for an honest man. Could he find one in the whole city? All right. And so what I'm saying here, Diogenes could just as well be searching for one establishment-approved Ivy League expert who knows what they're talking about and tells the truth to the public. And it's almost become a fact that you can't get promoted to the high positions in conventional medicine unless you're an ignoramus about nutrition, epidemiology, and toxicology. Because if somebody started talking about that kind of stuff and caused the hospital to lose money, they would never promote that person. Okay, here's another nice picture of Diogenes, the poor man's philosopher, this one by Jean-Léon Gérôme. And so what I'm saying is, this is so obvious to me, and until conventional medicine learns to love the patient and accepts, biblical type ethics, it never will. It never will. That's why medicine can't improve. It's always just going to keep poisoning people, ripping them off, and operating on them. And I don't know if I told you this joke already. I might have. What's the difference between a lawyer and a doctor? A lawyer will rob you. A doctor will rob you and kill you. Voltaire saying, "I want my doctor to believe in God so that he does not rob me." Okay, a couple more Voltaire quotes. It is dangerous to be right when the established are wrong. To announce truth is an infallible method for being persecuted. I am very fond of truth, but not at all of martyrdom. Okay. So I kind of figured out, I was a little bit scared to tell you guys all this stuff. I'm kind of telling you more than I probably should, as much as I can for this space of communication. But I'm so unknown, I don't think they're going to care too much about me. You know, there's people that are known thousands and thousands and thousands of times better than me. And so they'll be my canary in the coal mine. Okay, Voltaire continues. To learn who rules you, simply find out who you are not allowed to criticize. Those who can make you believe absurdities can make you commit atrocities. That's an important quote. Those who can make you believe absurdities can make you commit atrocities. Voltaire goes on a little more. The right to free speech is more important than the content of the speech. Liberty of thought is the life of the soul. I do not agree with the words that you say, but I will defend to death your right to say them. So those are some quotes by Voltaire. And Voltaire was clever and funny, and I do like those things about him. In other ways, though, Voltaire was a screw-up. I mean, his way of thinking, trying to... See, regular person can't be a philosopher. Regular people, they don't have the interest to be that intellectually sophisticated. They need the metaphysics, so to speak, of religion. Otherwise, you end up in a chaos, and that's what happened to France, okay? Around 1793, France went into chaos. Okay, and that was unfortunate. Okay, a little bit more Voltaire here. I don't know, I was in the mood for Voltaire for some reason when I was getting through this part of the chapter. I have only made one prayer to God. O Lord, make my enemies ridiculous, and he has granted it, says Voltaire. Okay? Oh, and then Voltaire continues. Interviewer says to Voltaire, how come no woman has ever written a great tragedy? And Voltaire says, the composition of tragedy requires testicles, and the only reward to be expected from literature is contempt if one fails and hatred if one exceeds. Okay, so then I've got a quote from Ayn Rand, and she's my closet Christian. And what's funny about her is she's a lady, and she's actually written a couple of great tragedies. She wrote The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged. But here's a quote by Ayn Rand. The smallest minority is the individual. And yep, that's the key right there. If you value the individual and you put them above everything else, above money and everything else, everything will be good. But you can't do that unless you have the metaphysics to do it. And Schopenhauer said is that religion is metaphysics for the masses, okay? Regular person is not a philosopher. They're not going to reason out a system of values. They just don't do that, okay? This right here is a painting of Socrates. Socrates has been called the saint of philosophy, the martyr of philosophies. Okay, and so this painting, by the way, is called The Death of Socrates, which was in 399 BC, before Christ. Painting is by Jacques-Louis David in 1787. Okay, so quote from Socrates, the purpose of philosophy is to determine how we ought to live. In order to decide how to live well, we should study and learn that which is good for us and what is bad for us. So do what is good for us and avoid what is bad for us. Pretty good common sense. In the courtroom in 399 BC, Socrates was asked by his interrogator, aren't you ashamed of going around and behaving in such a way that everybody in Athens hates you? And Socrates replied, no, I am on a mission from God to follow the truth wherever it leads. I would be ashamed of myself if I didn't do this. Okay, so pretty sad. Here's Socrates, there's the hemlock, okay, there's his students and friends, and here's poor Plato who admires Socrates as the greatest man that Athens had produced. And Plato asked himself the question, what kind of a city bumps off the greatest man that it has produced? Okay, that's a pretty serious question. That whole time was pretty sad in Athens because they had lost the war to Sparta. But it was really Athens that had provoked that war in the first place. But it had disastrous consequences for Athens, and it certainly had disastrous consequences for Socrates. And the Greeks were divided. Instead of being united, they should be keeping out outsiders because Sparta crushes Athens, and now all of Greece is weak, and then not too much later, Macedonia comes and takes over with Philip and then Alexander the Great. Oh, and then, like I said, I was a little bit afraid to write this book, but I said to myself, I'm not too well known. I'm not worth it for Big Pharma to come after me because I'm such an unknown. Almost nobody reads my books or watches my videos. And so I said, don't tell your friends about this. I don't want to be worth their trouble. Okay, this is really just for the elite few. Okay. All right, and now here's the quote from Exodus in the Bible. Okay, chapter 15, verse 26. And God said, if thou wilt hearken to the voice of the Lord and give ear to his commandments, I will put none of these diseases upon thee, which I have brought upon the Egyptians, in this case known as the low-carb paleo carnivore lowlifes. For I am the Lord God who heals you. Okay, so basically God's saying, if you just do what I say, eat the Genesis diet, he'll keep you healthy. Hopefully that's going to happen. Okay, so those who seek it can get great benefits by studying these things, like we talked about: nutrition, epidemiology, toxicology. And then here's a picture. It's a great painting. It's called The Canterbury Pilgrims by Paul Hardy from 1903. And of course, we all think of, having read about the Canterbury Tales of Chaucer, one that April with the floor suit had perched the roots. Okay, we remember that, all right? And what I'm saying, though, is the patients, they have sort of like this happy attitude about going to a hospital quite often. And you'll hear them sitting in the waiting room talking to each other, telling stories. And they don't understand a hospital is a very serious place, okay? If you go to a hospital, you only go if you have to. You get your business done and you get out of there. You should always dress very nice. You'll be treated with a lot more respect if you dress real nice. But it's a dangerous place. And even though it can save your life if you really need to be there, if you're ignorant, it could actually make your life worse. And what I'm saying is there's always a bunch of people in a Western hospital that want to operate on you, that want to stick a tube down your throat, stick a tube up your butt. So, if you just randomly walk in there, you're going to get pushed into some screening study and end up with something like, a tube down your throat, a tube up your butt, some junior resident doing a procedure on you, or in some screening test like prostate specific antigen, and all of a sudden you're told you have elevation of it, possible prostate cancer. Now you need a prostate cancer biopsy, and somebody sticking 12 giant needles up your butt, okay, or ripping into your prostate, potentially increasing your risk of all kinds of problems and discomfort. I wouldn't want that. Okay. All right, now here's Arthur Schopenhauer, and he wrote the greatest book ever on how to write well. Actually, the two greatest books on how to write well are Arthur Schopenhauer on I think it was the history of literature or the philosophy of literature, and then Ayn Rand's book, the Romantic Manifesto. Okay, so what does Schopenhauer talk about here? We talk about how healthy the diet is. Schopenhauer says all truth goes through three phases. First of all, it's ridicule. Vegan diet, that's all BS. Secondly, it's vehemently opposed. They're going to try to cling to their moneymaker and fight for it. And then eventually it'll be accepted as self-evident, but who knows? That could take 50 years, 100 years, or more. Okay, Schopenhauer, he says, the object of science is to recognize the many in the one, to perceive the rules in any given example, and not just go on counting up facts ad infinitum. Okay. All right, so yes, we recognize that many, if not most, diseases can be prevented or treated with low fat, low protein, low sodium, 100% vegan, whole food diet, and no oils. That's the concept that ties it all together. Because like I said, the medicine students are taught this disease over here, this disease over here, this disease over here, this one over here. They're not taught that all of these diseases are due to high-fat diets. All of these diseases are due to high-sodium diets. All of these problems in the abdomen are due to lack of fiber. Okay? They're not ever taught how to put it all together and to think in an efficient way, holistic way. Okay, so let us pray. The Holy Berry. Holy Berry, mother of starch, blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Vegas. Pray for us dietary sinners, now and at the hour of our dinners. Amen. Okay, now the Padre Nuestro, our Father, especially for Impotence Clinic. Our Father, who art in boner land, solid wood be thy name. Give us this day our daily boner, and forgive us our dietary sins, as we forgive those who misdiet against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from impotence. Amen. Okay, that's it for this chapter. Hope that was helpful.